There is a field in Oxfordshire, just over 1,000 acres of rolling English countryside, the kind that painters have been trying to capture for centuries and never quite managing. Sheep have grazed it, rain has soaked it, generations of farmers have broken their backs on it. And one autumn morning in 2008, a man best known for making engines scream on television stood in the middle of all that mud, looked around him, and decided this was exactly where he needed to be. His name, of course, is Jeremy Clarkson. And what happened next is one of the most unlikely, most human, most quietly extraordinary stories in modern British life. This isn't a story about celebrity. It isn't a story about television. It's a story about a man who found something real in an age that had largely stopped looking for it. And in doing so, he accidentally reminded an entire nation what it had been slowly forgetting. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand why a jar of honey in a muddy Oxfordshire field means something far bigger than honey. Let's go back to October 2008. The world is in free fall. Lehman Brothers has collapsed. Billions are being wiped off markets daily. Ordinary people are watching their savings shrink in real time, and the wealthy are doing what the wealthy always do in a crisis, pulling their money somewhere safe and holding their breath. Jeremy Clarkson does something else entirely. He spends £6 million on Oxfordshire mud. No fanfare, no press conference, just a quiet acquisition of farmland that most people in his circle probably raised an eyebrow at. A television presenter buying a farm in the middle of a global financial collapse. Eccentric, at best. Possibly foolish, except it wasn't foolish at all. It was something that old money families in Britain have understood for centuries. Something that the aristocracy built their entire world upon. Land in England doesn't go to zero. It doesn't get delisted. It doesn't collapse overnight because a bank in New York made the wrong decision. It simply sits there, season after season, quietly holding its value while everything else fluctuates. Clarkson had also done his homework on something else: agricultural property relief. In Britain, farmland passes to your children entirely free of inheritance tax. Not at a reduced rate. Free. For a man building lasting wealth, that changes every calculation. The land preserves what you've built. The taxman receives nothing when you die. He wrote about this openly in the Times, with the cheerful directness of someone who wants you to know he's thought carefully about something most people never consider. He called it the finest investment available to any British subject. And looking back now, it's hard to argue. That £6 million field is now worth over $12 million in land value alone, before a single jar of honey, a single pint of lager, or a single television episode is counted. He doubled his money simply by owning something real. But the land was never really the story. The land was just the beginning. When Clarkson arrived at what would eventually be called Diddley Squat Farm, there was already someone there. A farm manager named Caleb Cooper, who had been working that land before Clarkson ever set foot on it, and who would go on to become one of the most unexpected household names in British farming history. Caleb is everything Clarkson is not. Patient where Clarkson is impatient. Quietly expert where Clarkson is theatrically clueless. Unimpressed by celebrity in a way that is entirely genuine and therefore utterly compelling. Their relationship, which would eventually be watched by millions of people across the world, was not invented by a television producer. It was simply already there, waiting for someone to point a camera at it. And this is the first great truth of what Clarkson built. He didn't manufacture anything. He found something authentic and had the wisdom, or perhaps the instinct, to leave it alone. In the early years, the farm operated as farms do, quietly, seasonally, with the particular combination of hope and anxiety that anyone who grows things for a living knows intimately. Clarkson was learning, slowly and sometimes painfully, what it actually means to work the land, the machinery that breaks at the worst possible moment, the weather that ignores every plan you've made, the markets that seem designed specifically to humble the optimistic. Year 1 profit, £144, from 1,000 acres. From a £6 million investment, £144. His friends laughed. His accountant presumably wept. And Clarkson, being Clarkson, wrote about it openly, honestly, and with a self-awareness that would turn out to be the most valuable thing he'd ever produced. When Amazon Prime commissioned Clarkson's farm, the farming world was politely amused. A television presenter stumbling through harvests, getting things badly wrong, arguing with planning inspectors and machinery and the English weather. Fine. Probably wouldn't survive past a first series. Mildly entertaining, ultimately forgettable. What nobody predicted, because nothing quite like it had existed before, was what happens when millions of people watch a show that feels genuinely, uncomplicatedly true. We live in an age of performance, of carefully curated lives and manufactured authenticity, of influencers and brand deals and content strategies. We are, as a culture, extraordinarily sophisticated at detecting when something is being sold to us disguised as something real. And we are hungry, deeply, almost desperately hungry, for the things that are actually real. Clarkson's farm was actually real. The crop failures were real. The planning battles were real. The 144 pounds was real. The exasperation was real, and the affection between Clarkson and Caleb, gruff and undemonstrative as it is, was real in a way that audiences recognized immediately and responded to with something close to relief. The show became Prime Video's most watched UK original series, not because it had the biggest budget or the most spectacular production values, but because it had something that no budget can buy and no production team can manufacture. It had a story that was actually happening. And here is where the financial architecture of what Clarkson built becomes genuinely remarkable. Amazon reports paying Clarkson in the region of 10 to 12 million pounds annually for his television work. The farm itself might barely break even on its agricultural operations in a good year. But the television show about the farm, that is where the real engine sits. Every tractor breakdown that costs money on the farming side earns multiples of that loss on the television side. The failure is the product. The chaos is the content. And the content is worth an extraordinary amount of money. It is the most counterintuitive business model in British broadcasting history, and it works with a consistency that should keep every conventional television executive awake at night wondering how they missed it. The diddly squat farm shop began as a shed. This is not a romanticization. It was genuinely a shed, with some potatoes, a handwritten sign, and the kind of optimism that only makes sense when you haven't yet seen what's coming. What came was a queue, and then a longer queue, and then a queue that stretched further than anyone had planned for, driven entirely by the first series of the television show and the particular kind of loyalty it had created in its viewers. By any conventional retail analysis, the diddly squat farm shop should not work. The prices are a premium. The range is deliberately limited, restricted by a planning condition imposed by West Oxfordshire District Council to products sourced within 16 miles of the farm. The hours are inconsistent, the parking is inadequate, there is no loyalty scheme, no digital strategy, no social media campaign in the traditional sense. Within a year of launching, the business had grown from £44,000 in assets to over 1.3 million. Because the shop is not really a shop. It is a destination. It is a place where people who have spent hours watching something they love on their television screens can come and stand in the actual place where it happened, can buy something that exists in the world they have been watching, can feel connected, in the most tangible possible way, to a story that matters to them. People do not queue for 3 hours to buy honey. They queue to participate in something. And a jar of honey that costs twice what it would in a supermarket is a perfectly reasonable price for that participation, as the queues prove week after week. The planning restrictions that were meant to limit the farm shop turned out to be its greatest advantage. Forced to source everything within 16 miles, Clarkson and his partner Lisa Hogan discovered local suppliers they would never otherwise have found. The limitation became the identity. The constraint became the story. There is a lesson here that goes far beyond farming. The things we are forced to work around often end up defining us more honestly than the things we choose freely. West Oxfordshire District Council deserves a moment of reflection because their role in the Clarkson story is one of the most extraordinary accidental contributions to a television series in British broadcasting history. They refused the car park. They shut down the restaurant with enforcement notices. They declined application after application, citing the area of outstanding natural beauty and the impact of commercial activity on a rural setting. They believed, entirely reasonably by their own framework, that they were the regulatory authority and that Clarkson was the problem. What they were actually doing was writing episodes. Every refusal became a storyline. Every enforcement notice became drama. Every planning inspector's report became content that millions of people watched and discussed and argued about and shared. And every piece of that content drove more visitors to the very operation the council was trying to constrain. The council thought they had leverage. They were providing the narrative. They thought they were the authority. They were the antagonist in a story that made the protagonist more sympathetic with every objection raised. Clarkson was playing an entirely different game. And the most remarkable thing is that he didn't need to play it cynically. The frustration was genuine. The bureaucratic obstruction was real. The difficulty of trying to build something in the British countryside against a planning system that seems designed to prevent exactly that kind of building, all of it was completely authentic, which made it, of course, all the more compelling to watch. In the second series, Clarkson grew some barley and decided to make beer. The drinks industry was not particularly worried. Celebrity alcohol brands follow a well-worn pattern that the industry understands completely. Famous person licenses their name. Existing company does the work. Celebrity appears at launches, collects their percentage, and moves on. It is a transaction dressed as passion. Hawkstone Lager did not follow that pattern. Clarkson built a brewery, with actual equipment, actual brewers, actual supply chains. The barley comes from his farm and from neighboring farms in Oxfordshire and Gloucestershire, not from wherever the global commodity markets make cheapest that quarter, but from specific fields tended by specific farmers who now have a guaranteed buyer at a fair price. That detail matters enormously. In a world where agricultural supply chains have become increasingly abstracted and anonymous, where the person who grows your food is invisible to the person who eats it, Hawkstone built something that goes in precisely the opposite direction. You can know where the barley came from. You can know whose fields it grew in. By 2025, Hawkstone had posted sales of over £21 million, growth of 134% in a single year. The 23rd fastest-growing private company in Britain, stocked in Waitrose, Sainsbury's, Morrison's, and over 2,000 pubs nationwide. An advertising campaign in which British farmers sang a rather enthusiastic endorsement of the product was banned by the Advertising Standards Authority. It was immediately watched by over 1 million people online. The ban was, most observers agreed, the finest marketing the brand could possibly have received. Carlsberg reportedly made a private acquisition approach at £50 million. Clarkson reportedly declined within 24 hours. Because without the local sourcing, without the Oxfordshire barley, without the Cotswold farmers who are part of the story, Hawkstone is just another lager. The values aren't a marketing layer on top of the business. The values are the business. You cannot buy one without destroying the other. The brewery now employs 53 people and has expanded 3 times in 4 years. Its valuation stands at £75 million, entirely separate from the farm's own £45 million valuation. 2 distinct businesses, each making the other more valuable, each telling the same story in a different medium. Then came the farmer's dog. A pub situated near the farm, built on a principle that most people in hospitality would describe as commercial madness. Every ingredient British, no exceptions, no Heinz ketchup, no Coca-Cola. Black pepper from Cornwall at 10 times the cost of the imported variety. British beef instead of cheaper alternatives from elsewhere. A wine list that caused the accountant considerable distress. Clarkson described it, without apparent embarrassment, as a brilliant way of turning £100 into 94. The pub employs 146 people. It loses money on food with a kind of cheerful aristocratic indifference to the mathematics. And it recovers that loss entirely on Hawkstone Lager, where Clarkson retains every penny of margin. What looks like eccentricity is, on closer examination, something considerably more deliberate. The pub exists to showcase British farming, to give visitors a place to spend time and money beyond the farm shop queue, to provide filming locations for future television series, and to sell Hawkstone at full margin to customers who arrive for the beef and leave having fallen in love with the beer. The British-only sourcing policy is either the most commercially reckless decision in the history of British hospitality or the most strategically brilliant. The answer depends entirely on what you believe the pub is actually for. And the answer is, it exists to stand for something. In an industry where most establishments stand for nothing beyond the transaction, the farmer's dog stands for British farmers and British seasons and British food culture in a way that is awkward and expensive and inconvenient, and completely unlike anywhere else in the country. People do not queue to visit ordinary pubs. They queue to visit places that mean something. Even if, perhaps especially if, meaning something costs its owner money. We need to return to Caleb, because Caleb Cooper's story is, in some ways, the most human part of everything that has happened at Diddley Squat. He was already there when Clarkson arrived, working the land, doing his job, expert in a way that takes a lifetime to become. He wasn't cast, he wasn't auditioned, he wasn't discovered in any conventional sense. He was simply present, already real, already himself, in a field in Oxfordshire. Today, Caleb Cooper has assets approaching £1 million. He tours as a performer with his own show, The World According to Caleb. His merchandise sells. His appearances sell out. His name on a product carries genuine commercial weight. He is, by any measure, one of the most unexpected success stories British farming has produced in living memory. And what makes his story genuinely moving, beyond the personal good fortune of it, is what it reveals about what Clarkson actually understood. He recognized that without Caleb, there is no show. Not because Caleb was manufactured or shaped to fit a television brief, but because he was already irreplaceable, already the kind of person whose presence makes everything around him more honest. Clarkson's greatest decision was not to improve him, not to make him more telegenic, more articulate, more conventionally appealing to a mainstream audience. He pointed the camera at what was already there and trusted that viewers would respond. They responded by making him a household name. There is something deeply hopeful about that. In a world that relentlessly rewards the polished and the performed, a farmer from Oxfordshire became famous for being completely, immovably himself. And the audience, more sophisticated than anyone gave them credit for, recognized exactly what they were seeing. Let's stand back for a moment and look at what Clarkson actually built. Because when you see it whole, it is something that no business school would have designed and no consultant would have recommended, and yet it works with a logic that becomes more beautiful the more carefully you examine it. The television show made the farm shop viable. The farm shop built the brand. The brand launched the brewery. The brewery funded the pub. The pub provided more content. The content drove more visitors. The visitors bought more beer. The beer grew the brewery. The brewery needed more barley. The barley came from the farm. Everything feeds everything else. Every element makes every other element more valuable. It is not a farm with some side businesses. It is a flywheel. And the £144 profit in year one, that catastrophic, hilarious, brilliant failure, was the moment the flywheel began to turn. The numbers as they stand today tell a story of their own. Land value, £45 million. Brewery valuation, $75 million. Farm shop turnover, over $1 million annually. The farmer's dog, 146 employees. Hawkstone, stocked in thousands of pubs and major supermarkets across Britain. Amazon television income, reported at £10 to £12 million per year. From £6 million of mud, from a shed with some potatoes, from a profit of £144. Here is what I find most remarkable about the story of Clarkson's farm. It is not the financial architecture. It is not the television ratings. It is not even the improbable transformation of a motoring journalist into a figure who matters to British agriculture. It is this. Farming experts noted, with genuine surprise and a little ruefulness, that Clarkson had done more for public awareness of British agriculture in a single television series than 30 years of conventional countryside broadcasting had managed. The British Farming Awards gave him an accolade for flying the flag for British farming, awarded by people with every professional reason to be skeptical of a celebrity playing at their trade, who chose instead to recognize what he had actually achieved. He made people care. Millions of people who had never been within 50 miles of a combine harvester began to understand, perhaps for the first time in their lives, what it actually costs to grow food in Britain, what the weather does to a crop, what the commodity markets do to a farmer's income, what it feels like to work an entire season and receive a profit so small it barely covers the fuel. That understanding matters. It matters for British farming. It matters for the countryside. It matters for the way we think about food and land and what it means to produce something real in a world that has largely moved to the virtual and the abstract. Clarkson was sacked by the BBC for an incident involving a cold steak and a producer. It was, by any reasonable assessment, an act of catastrophic professional self-destruction. A career apparently ended in an instant. In the space cleared by that disaster, he built something worth over £120 million. And more than that, something that genuinely changed the conversation about what British farming is and what it could be. The BBC executives who declined to renew his contract are, one imagines, still reflecting on the mathematics of that decision. There is a line Clarkson once wrote that has stayed with me. He said that land is a better investment than any bank can offer, that the government receives nothing when you die, that the price of food can only go up. He was right on every count, but what he couldn't have written, because he didn't know it yet, was that the land would become the stage for something that no business plan could have predicted. Something that could only be stumbled into with enough stubbornness and enough camera time and enough honest chaos to make a whole country stop and pay attention and feel something. That is the real story of what happened in that Oxfordshire field, not the investment, not the brewery, not even the shop with the impossible queues and the honey that people drive 3 hours to buy. The real story is that a man bought a field, made every possible mistake in it, refused to be ashamed of any of them, and in doing so reminded an entire nation why the English countryside still matters, why the people who work it still matter, why the food that comes from it still matters. And somewhere in Oxfordshire right now, a man in a wax jacket is probably shouting at something that is broken in an interesting way. A patient farm manager is explaining, not for the first time, why it was always going to break. A camera is rolling, and the flywheel turns. If this story moved you the way it moved me, if you found yourself feeling something for a field in Oxfordshire that you've probably never visited and may never visit, then you already understand what Britain Revealed is for. We are here to find the stories that are hiding in plain sight. The people quietly doing something remarkable in a corner of this island. The ideas that look small until you understand what they mean. The moments when Britain remembers what it's actually good at. There are more stories like this one. Subscribe to Britain Revealed and tap the bell so you don't miss a single one of them. And tell me in the comments, have you ever visited Diddley Squat? Have you tasted Hawkstone? Or is there a British story you think we should be telling? Drop it below. I read every single comment, and some of our best future episodes begin exactly there. Britain has always had extraordinary stories. We are just here to reveal them.